3,000 years ago, in Nineveh, someone carved stories into clay that we were never meant to read. Stories that speak of universal catastrophes, of skies torn apart by fire, of numbers too precise to belong to that era. Those tablets, which survived the city's fire and the passage of time, are now in the British Museum. Small fragments of clay, seemingly fragile, yet they hide mysteries more solid than stone. Those inscriptions mention a flood predating the Bible, astronomical calculations ahead of modern math, and some scholars say a description of an asteroid hitting the Alps. What did the scribes of Nineveh really inscribe, and who gave them this incredible knowledge? And perhaps the last memory of a vanished civilization. Today we will explore these amazing artifacts and this ancient culture. But before we start, as always, we invite you to subscribe to the channel to support our work and not miss the upcoming videos. In the 7th century before Christ, Nineveh, in present-day Iraq, was among the world's most powerful cities. Ancient chronicles tell that its walls were so imposing that they measured over 12 kilometers in perimeter, with 15 fortified gates. The royal palace of Ashurbanipal stood at the city center. Ashurbanipal, the last great Assyrian ruler, was more than a warrior king. He was cultured and passionate about knowledge. He could read and write in several languages, which was uncommon for rulers then. And he had an ambition that set him apart from all his predecessors, to gather all the knowledge of the known world in one place. He sent scribes, messengers, and ambassadors throughout the Near East with a precise order to copy and bring to Nineveh every text, every manual, every available story. This led to the creation of the Library of Ashurbanipal, the largest ancient archive, holding over 30,000 cuneiform clay tablets, a vast encyclopedia of Mesopotamia. But Nineveh's fate changed suddenly in 612 before Christ. A coalition of Medes and Babylonians laid siege to the city. The walls collapsed, the royal palace was plundered, and Nineveh was set on fire. The Assyrians disappeared from history, and with them the memory of their knowledge. Yet it was that very fire which destroyed the city that saved the library. The heat transformed raw clay tablets into durable ceramics. Unintentionally, the enemies of Nineveh had baked and preserved the knowledge of the empire for millennia. For centuries, the ruins were forgotten and covered by sand, until in the 19th century, a man decided to bring them back to light. His name was Austin Henry Layard, a young British explorer and diplomat. In 1845, he began excavating at Kuyunjik, near modern-day Mosul. With him was Hormuzd Rassam, an Assyrian Christian who was well acquainted with the local language and traditions. They started clearing meters of earth and debris. First, they discovered colossal statues, the famed winged figures of Assyrian palaces. Soon after, smaller, more delicate, but far more significant objects appeared: fragments, tablets, cuneiforms. Layard immediately realized that he had something unique in his hands. It wasn't just archaeology, it was the written voice of a people we had only known through the Bible and Greek historians. When the first crates of tablets arrived in London, Victorian scholars were faced with a puzzle. Cuneiform writing had only recently been deciphered. It required time, patience, and ancient language knowledge to interpret those signs. Of the young Assyriologists devoted to the task, one stood out. George Smith was not a career academic. He was born into a modest family and worked as a banknote engraver. However, his main passion was Mesopotamia. He spent hours at the British Museum studying the fragments brought by Layard and Rassam. In 1872, while he was deciphering one of the tablets from Ashurbanipal's library, he noticed something incredible. The text spoke of a man, Utnapishtim, who received a warning from the gods. A great flood was about to destroy humanity. Utnapishtim had to build a great vessel, take his family and animals with him, and wait for the storm to end. After days of rain and endless waters, the boat landed on a mountain. To find out if the land had reappeared, Utnapishtim first released a dove, then a raven. George Smith was stunned. Those lines were practically identical to the biblical story of Noah, but there was a fundamental difference. This tablet was much older than the Bible. When the news was made public, Victorian England was left breathless. The Bible was no longer the oldest text. The flood story existed earlier, carved into Nineveh's clay, centuries before Moses wrote Genesis. The story was part of the famous Epic of Gilgamesh, the Mesopotamian epic poem that tells the adventures of the king of Uruk. In the 11th tablet of the work, Gilgamesh seeks the secret of immortality and meets Utnapishtim himself, the survivor of the flood, who tells him his story. The parallel with Genesis was striking. The construction of a great ship, the rescue of men and animals, the mountain where the vessel lands, and the birds released to search for land. It was hard to believe it was just a coincidence. Smith's discovery ignited intense debate. Was it the Bible that had copied from the Babylonians? Or had both traditions inherited an even older story, a shared memory of a real cataclysm? But if that tablet had shaken 19th century historians, there was another one, hidden among thousands of fragments, destined to raise even more troubling questions. An artifact that at first glance seemed insignificant, a clay disc engraved with cuneiform signs that represented a map of the starry sky. For years, everyone only saw a planisphere in it, a key example of the Mesopotamian skill in tracking and predicting star movements. But in 2008, two British engineers, Alan Bond and Mark Hamsel, decided to analyze it with modern tools. However, their approach was not philological but technical. They regarded the tablet as an actual astronomical observation record. First, Bond and Hamsel precisely transcribed the cuneiform signs that indicated the stellar positions. Using celestial simulation software, they recreated Mesopotamia's sky across various eras. The result left them speechless. The stars did not match the sky of 650 before Christ, as the official interpretation claimed, but rather that of June 29th, 3123 before Christ. Almost 2,500 years before the supposed creation of the tablet. At that point, two inevitable questions arose. The first, why depict a sky so far back in time? The second, how was it possible to calculate such a distant date with so much precision? According to the two scholars, the answer to the first question is simple. That sky was not random. It was the memory of an important date, an event that had to be remembered. Looking closer at the tablet, they saw an unusual mark beside the engraved constellations, an oblique line, different from all the others, that did not correspond to any known star. It wasn't a mistake, it was proof of a real phenomenon. For Bond and Hamsel, that mark represented a large celestial body that had crossed the skies of Mesopotamia, leaving behind a memorable luminous trail. In other words, an asteroid. The two scholars then tried to calculate its trajectory using the reference stars. The direction was not pointing towards Mesopotamia. The object had continued towards the northwest, projecting that line onto the world map. The conclusion was surprising. The asteroid had headed towards Europe. And if that tablet really represented the entry of an asteroid into the atmosphere, then there must be a trace on Earth, a scar left in the landscape. Following the trajectory indicated by the markings, Bond and Hamsel arrived at a specific point on the map, the Austrian Alps in the heart of Tyrol. And indeed, there was something there. Köfels in the Ötztal district is home to one of Europe's largest landslides. A 5-square-kilometer mass of rock slid down the valley in one catastrophic event. This was not a slow collapse or multiple landslides over time, geological dating shows. It was a massive landslide about 9,800 years ago. Scholars have long debated the landslide's origin. It lacks an impact crater, a circular rim, and meteorite remains. It's a landslide, say the geologists, a huge landslide, but still a landslide. And yet anomalies remain. The rocks of Köfels show unusual signs, deep fractures and surfaces that seem to have been exposed to extremely high temperatures, as if they were partially melted in an instant. Some layers show signs of sliding under extreme pressure, which simple gravitational landslides can't easily explain. It's as if an immense force struck the mountain in a single instant, releasing energy that goes beyond normal geological processes. These anomalies are exactly what led to the Bond and Himsel hypothesis. According to two engineers, the asteroid described on the tablet didn't hit the Earth with a direct impact, as usually happens when a meteorite creates a crater, but at a very low angle, grazing. Such an entry is capable of devastating effects. The celestial body disintegrates in the atmosphere, releasing energy comparable to hundreds of atomic bombs. The explosion generates an immense shock wave that hits the ground, compressing and shattering entire mountains. In such a scenario, there isn't a circular crater left, but a widespread collapse, a colossal landslide, an irregular scar that deforms the landscape. And this, for Bond and Himsel, is exactly what happened at Köfels. Not just a natural landslide, but a direct result of an asteroid's aerial explosion. But there's one point we can't ignore. Geology places the Köfels landslide at about 9,800 years ago, in the early Holocene, right after the end of the last glaciation. Bond and Himsel, after reading the tablet, date the event to 3,123 before Christ, more than 4,000 years later. So we have two timelines that do not match. According to official science, the Tyrolean landslide predates the Assyrian era. At that time, cuneiform tablets did not exist. For Bond and Himsel, it is precisely the event described on the tablet. An asteroid entered the atmosphere at a low angle, exploded, and could collapse the entire mountain. Either geology overestimated the landslide's age, or the tablet doesn't describe the Köfels event. But maybe the real problem isn't even the dating. Maybe we're just looking at the issue from the wrong perspective. But before we get to that, we need to talk about the hypothesis of Joachim Seifert and Frank Lemke, two researchers who in 2014 reinterpreted this tablet in a completely different way. According to the two researchers, the engravings on the tablet do not simply represent constellations, but a sequence of images. It's like a storyboard showing how a real astronomical phenomenon develops. By analyzing those marks as successive phases of an event and comparing them with the sky reconstructed using astronomical software, Seifert and Lemke identified a precise match. On June 22, 2193 before Christ, that day they claim a fragment of the Taurid comet stream entered Earth's atmosphere, disintegrating over the Middle East and leaving visible consequences on the climate and perhaps on the history of the region's civilizations. At this point, we have two different datings. Bond and Himsel talk about 3123 before Christ, while Joachim Seifert and Frank Lemke propose 2193 before Christ. It's easy to get lost among such distant numbers and such different hypotheses. But as we said, maybe we're wrong. Observation point. Because the real question we should ask ourselves is not when it happened, but rather what happened. The accuracy of dating can always be uncertain, but the origin of the phenomenon, indicated by Seifert and Lemke, gives us a very precious clue. The Taurid cometary stream, a familiar phenomenon, as Earth still encounters it twice yearly, in summer and autumn. To us, it looks like a spectacular meteor shower. But among those bright trails are larger fragments that can not only light up the skies, but also devastate entire continents. But then an inevitable question arises. Why can't modern scholars manage to agree? Why do we have different conflicting interpretations and incompatible chronologies? Maybe it's because the tablets aren't a direct chronicle of people observing the sky. It's just a copy of old knowledge, passed down and distorted over centuries. A knowledge that, over time, lost its scientific language and survived only as myth, ritual, and superstition. To confirm this view, Another extraordinary document comes to our aid: the Sumerian King List, a text that clearly distinguishes a before and an after the flood. Formerly, kings ruled for millennia, seeming almost immortal. Later, kingdoms lasted normal spans, ruled by men like us. It's a clear break that suggests not the start of civilization, but the end of an older world. And this is where the crucial question arises. If tablet K8, 1538, holds the memory of a cosmic cataclysm, what do the other tablets from Ashurbanipal's library tell us? Among the most surprising artifacts are the Mulapin. They may seem like simple lists, constellations, rules for solstices and equinoxes, and day-night calculations, but they are actually astronomy manuals. Remarkably, the Mulapin tablets we have today were discovered in Nineveh, though they weren't originally written there. They are Assyrian copies of much older texts, written centuries or millennia earlier in Babylonian or Sumerian times. Scholars agree that in the 7th century before Christ, the scribes did not invent these concepts, but transcribed them from earlier traditions. This isn't true just for the Mulapin. The Enuma Anu Enlil series, which merges astronomical observations and omens, reflects the same dynamic. Centuries of continuous observations, recorded and recopied by generations of scribes, were needed to compile those texts. Every eclipse, every conjunction, every celestial anomaly was recorded meticulously, but then imbued with religious meanings. A king would fall, a famine would come. This may indicate the original core data and calculations were no longer fully understood, and thus reinterpreted divinatorily. The most surprising case is the tablets tracking Jupiter's movements. In 2016, a study from Humboldt University of Berlin revealed that some Mesopotamian scribes used a highly sophisticated mathematical method, known today as the trapezoidal method, to calculate the movement of the planet, a system that only emerged in Europe in the 14th century among Oxford and Paris mathematicians. But it was written on clay over 2,000 years before. These texts don't seem like the starting point of a civilization taking its first steps in science. Instead, they seem like the result of knowledge that was established, inherited, and copied, but is no longer fully understood. As if the Assyrians had been entrusted with the remnants of a much older scientific tradition, now reduced to fragments. When we put all these clues together, the tablets of Nineveh stop being simple archaeological artifacts. They become windows into a past much more complex than what history books tell us. What if the Sumerian king list, flood myths, astronomical tablets, and Enuma Anu Enlil omens simply describe this transition? Not the beginning of a civilization, but the distorted memory of its end. After all, the Earth gives us concrete clues. About 12,800 years ago, the planet underwent a sudden and abrupt cooling. The so-called Younger Dryas, according to some researchers, was caused by the disintegration of comet fragments in the atmosphere. And here, the connection with everything we've seen becomes surprising. Many scholars think those fragments came from the same comet stream as the Taurids, which the Earth still passes through twice a year. If this were true, it would mean one of prehistory's greatest catastrophes occurred alongside the Earth's passage through that cosmic trail. And so it's no surprise that for millennia humanity has celebrated death on those very days of the year, is it? From Dia de los Muertos in Mexico and Samhain of the Celts to the Christian calendar's commemoration of the dead. Not just religious festivals, but possibly rituals remembering a real event, when the sky burned and Earth changed forever. So, it's reasonable to question if the Sumerians or Assyrians actually invented this knowledge or just preserved its remnants, altered into mythical, divinatory rituals. Framing all this in this way is revolutionary, because what official historiography tells us is the dawn of human civilization could actually be its sunset. Not the start of culture, but the end of an older world, destroyed by cosmic disasters and left in fragments. Our history began on its ashes, unaware of what came before. Thank you. We know very well that this is a difficult view to accept because it overturns everything we thought we knew about our past. Yet the clues we followed, from Nineveh's tablets and flood legends to mysterious landslides, astronomical enigmas, and global archaeological anomalies, seem to converge all in the same direction. Those small fragments of clay which survive time and fire are not just artifacts. They are pieces of a global mosaic that is still waiting to be put back together. Perhaps the tablets do not tell the dawn of knowledge, but the memory of a broken wisdom. Maybe we aren't the first to look at the sky in fear, awaiting the comet's return. We're just the latest to do this, assuming we're the first civilization to do so. At this point, we are really curious to know your opinion. Write in the comments what you think. And if you like the video and want to support our work, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like and share. Every interaction from you is a concrete way to help us grow. See you in the next story.